In the tapestry of life, where every thread holds a story, America in black and white emerges as a haven for the voices echoing through the heart of our communities. In this podcast, we wade through the rivers of our collective experiences, celebrating the vibrant hues of change brought forth by the whispers of hope and the roars of action. It's more than just a conversation. It's a journey into the heart of our society, illuminated by the light of those daring to dream and do. Join us, and let your voice be the melody that guides us toward a dawn where every color finds its place in the masterpiece of our shared destiny. Together, let's paint a future brimming with the positives that dwell in our minds and the actions that shape our world.
Good evening, family, and welcome to another episode of America in Black and White, where truth meets legacy and storytelling becomes a tool for liberation. Tonight, we're diving into a conversation that's as urgent as it is timeless. In a world that often tries to erase or distort the image of Black fatherhood, we're reclaiming it. In a system that undervalues our children's brilliance, we're reimagining education. And in a media landscape that too often silences our voices, we're amplifying them one op ed, one classroom, one family at a time. Our guest tonight is a man who embodies all three of those missions. Larry Smith is not just an entrepreneur, he's a builder of bridges between generations. He's the founder of Father and Family, an organization that doesn't just support Black fathers, it restores them. He's an educator who sees classroom as a battleground for justice, and he's a writer whose world challenges power and uplift truth. Larry's work is rooted in the legacies of W.E.B. Du Bois, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and Frederick Douglass, three giants who understood that liberation begins with literacy, leadership, and love. And tonight we'll explore how their influence lives on in Larry's journey. So whether you're a father, a student, a writer, or simply someone searching for purpose in a complicated world, this episode is for you. Let's get into it. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce you all to Mr. Larry Smith. Hello, sir.
Mr. King, I'm fine. How are you, sir?
I am excellent. Um, Welcome to the show, and I'm glad to have you here as a guest.
Blessed to be here. I really appreciate that. I mean, very humbled by your introduction. One quick correction: I'm not the founder of Fathers and Family Center. I am president and CEO. We've been around for 32 years. My predecessor is Dr. Wallace McLaughlin. He was there for 29 of our 32 years. So I'm just the second president and CEO of the organization.
Okay. Um, Sorry about that.
I appreciate the no. That's why I appreciate the promotion.
So let's jump into the fatherhood and family restoration, which is part of the work that you're doing. Can you tell us what inspired you to work with father and family?
Well, most importantly, I think in that is I was a father at the age of 16, right? And so my parents were divorced when I was very young, maybe 4 or 5. My father was not involved in my life. He was, by all accounts, was a good man, but not a good father, frankly. And I don't mean that in a disparaging way. It's simply a fact. The Chinese have a proverb that says, "I have no friends, I have no enemies, I only have teachers." And my father taught me how to be a good father. I mean, to be candid, simply by doing the opposite of what he did to be present in the lives of my children. So when I had the opportunity to assume this role, I thought, okay, well, here's an opportunity to really give back to Black maleness, primarily Black. We accept all fathers. I do want to be clear about that. But primarily, we've served probably 95, 96% African Americans. And so this is the role that is most personal to me. And I've had a lot of great roles, but this one is very personal to me.
Mhm. So, how do you define restorative fatherhood in today's context?
That's a great question. We are best known for our Strong Fathers program. It's 3 weeks long, 90 hours of instruction, and we focus on what we call the 4 Ps of fatherhood. We want to help these men to become a better person, a better parent, a better partner, a better provider. That first one, a better person, we focus on a module that we call going from maleness to manhood, as that term begins to evolve. And then when we talk about being a better parent, the vast majority of the men we serve, like me, grew up in a home in which their father was not present. Doesn't necessarily mean that they aren't good fathers themselves. It simply means that they didn't have a full-time role model, at least, sort of in the home. And then when we talk about partner, most of the men who we serve were either never married or divorced. And so we talk about the importance of co-parenting, especially if you're no longer involved romantically with your children's mother or mothers. So we go through this. That's a short answer to a very long process that we have.
So, how do you guys go through the process of actually finding these young men that you guys work with?
It's primarily by referral. I mean, we advertise on radio stations, on TV station, actually a couple of TV stations. We have billboards and so on. We do outreach, but primarily it's via word of mouth. As I said, we're 32 years old, and we've served approximately 25,000 fathers in that period. So we've built up a pretty good reputation.
Mhm. What are the biggest misconceptions about Black fathers you aim to dismantle?
That's easy. People conflate. So people talk about a lot about 75% of African American children are born out of wedlock, and so they conflate that with these men not being involved in the lives of their children. The fact is, according to the CDC and others who've conducted research, African American fathers are actually the most involved as compared to white fathers and Hispanic fathers, and so it is not a good thing that we have such high percentage of our children born out of wedlock. But at the end of the day, just because you're not in the home doesn't necessarily mean that you're not in those children's lives.
Mm. Wow. So stigma then actually plays a major part in how people see the Black father, which is definitely the worst part of the misconception.
Mhm.
So when they see that misconception, then primarily, I just want to ask this because when you guys are working with these guys, and knowing that that stigma is there, how do you guys help them to overcome that? To be a whole lot clearer and precise as to who this individual is.
Yeah, the vast majority of the men we serve come to us with some kind of trauma. They're black men in America, again, primarily, not exclusively, but primarily. So they already have trauma simply by being a black man in America. So we get into a lot about their emotional state, their mental state. We want to help them to build up their self esteem. Roughly half the men we serve are returning citizens. They were incarcerated recently or at some point in the past, and we address that holistically. When these men come out of jail or prison, every not everyone, but a lot of people say, "Hey, get them a job, get them a job," and that's important. But it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. We address the whole person, and so if you have mental or emotional challenges, we address those along with the socioeconomic ones.
So, how does your organization support fathers, when they're like coming from incarceration and they're coming back into society? So, is that like a longer process that you guys have to use in order to work with these guys to bring them back?
It depends. So we do make sure that we connect them with professional help if they needed mental and emotional help. And as you well know, mental getting help with mental health is still a stigma in the African American community. I do believe personally that that's beginning to change somewhat, which I think is extremely important. But we do something that we call a warm handoff, right? We don't just give them a list of mental health providers. We do case management. So we follow up with them to make sure that they're going to their appointments and so on. So we have trusted partners to help us with that.
Wow, man, that's an interesting program.
Mhm.
What role does storytelling play in healing this generational trauma?
Storytelling is crucially important. I mean, even if you go back to our roots in Africa, when it comes to the griots, the storytellers, crucially important. And so, yeah, we there's a lot of storytelling both from our instructors, but then from the men themselves. We want to ensure that their voices are heard because, in many ways, the voices of Black men are ignored or suppressed in our society. And so we make sure that we let those voices be heard.
So, how do you engage mothers and extend families in your and extended families in your program?
Yeah, I do want to emphasize that it's fathers and families center, and so the women, wife, ex-wife, girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, plays an important role in this. And so, a specific, I'll give two specific examples. One is everything that the men are eligible for. The woman who is the mother or mothers of their children are eligible for. So, for example, at graduation, they have three options and they can overlap. One is to apply for a job with our 30 or so employer partners. A second is to go through certification training. So that's all the skilled trades, forklift driving, CDL, apartment maintenance, construction. We pay about $250,000 a year to send these men through that. Well, the I'll call them their partners. Their partner is eligible for any of that. If they didn't graduate from high school and they want a GED, we'll get them a GED. Last year we had 19 men and one girlfriend who graduated with their GED. And I also should say, even for that first part of the program, Strong Fathers program, we don't charge them anything. In fact, we pay the men to come to our program, right? Because their average income when they get to us is just about $11,000 a year. A year, so we don't charge them anything. But at the end of the day, every benefit that the we call them our clients have, the mother of their children is also eligible for.
Oh, wow. So, are you guys just in the one state, or are you guys in multiple states?
As of today, we're only in Indiana. However, my goal is to grow us statewide, regionally, and then nationally. Mr. King, I was an athlete all my life. As I like to say, many years and many pounds ago, I was an athlete. I was very, very competitive, especially in track. I was a two-time All-American. I was just shy of making the Olympic trials in the 400 meters. So I'm a competitive person. So for me, second place, as I used to say, is just the first loser, right? So I want us to be the largest organization of our type in the country so we can serve as many men as possible. One of the things that I say to our team is, for us, the bad news is the same as the good news, which is our services are needed everywhere.
Mm. You know, I mean, like, I tell you, I think a program like what you guys got is like basically it should be a model because
Hmm.
when you just think about, many places and some situations, I guess, are just different. Maybe different states are just different. But
Hmm.
with a program like what you guys have, how did you guys come up with the basis of actually establishing this program? Because I've never heard anything like what you guys do, which I think is really awesome.
Well, I appreciate that, and this is really the brainchild of my predecessor, Dr. Wallace McLaughlin. He's actually from a small town in Georgia. The name escapes me at this point, but he had a vision for this organization. He is a brilliant man, semi-retired now. He's actually a pastor as well. Earned his MDiv from Harvard University, PhD from Purdue University. So an extremely intelligent, well-educated Black man who has always had a heart for children. Because at the end of the day, you mentioned Frederick Douglass in your introduction, one of my heroes, certainly. And he said that it is easier to build strong children than it is to repair broken men. And so ultimately, what we're trying to do is affect children. Our mission statement is to equip fathers and empower families so that children thrive, right? So we're trying to affect the lives of children. And so, the program has changed a little bit since I took over 3 years ago, but the core is still there in terms of what he built.
So, can you share a moment when you saw a father's transformation firsthand?
Absolutely. It's funny you mentioned that. So just this morning, and I'll be posting this on social media in the days to come. I was in my office, which I rarely am. 70% of the time I'm outside the office, but was in my office this morning and had someone stop by and said, "Hey, Mr. Smith, we have one of our graduates come. A young man came. Jordan is his name." And so I went downstairs. So I mentioned training, right? We'll pay for training. So in this case, we paid for his CDL training. Well, he showed up and he went through our class in February. He comes back. Jordan is probably, God, he may not even be 30 years old. Go outside. He's got his own semi. His income went from 40,000 to $85,000. He's been to 38 states in that short period of time, and he just waxed eloquently about how our program really helped him as a young father. As I said, to going from maleness to manhood. We need to understand that just because, and excuse me, but just because you're born with a penis, that does not make you a man, right? What makes you a man is what you do to serve your community, to serve your family, to serve God. And those are principles that we emphasize in our program.
Oh, wow. So, what policy changes would most benefit Black fathers today?
Are you talking about federal government policy or?
Well, I think it will probably work in conjunction between, federal, state, down to local, city government, down to you guys.
Well, first and foremost, I I try not to be too political, but at the end of the day, we have to have politicians who are actually interested in elevating the people of this nation as opposed to themselves. And so, what as a lot of people, I mean, this doesn't come from me, as a lot of people have said, as Black America goes, the rest of America goes, right? So, if our economic policies are not what they should be, if we don't have our educational policies that we should have, and so on. It's just not going to work out well for us. We know this empirically, we know this experientially, and so we just need to have sane, competent, compassionate politicians who say our job is to serve the people, not to serve ourselves.
So, how do you measure success within father and family?
At the end of the day, and what this is what, in fact, what I said to the young man I referred to earlier, Jordan. Their success is our success, right? So if we have huge numbers of men come through the program and we raise millions of dollars and we get all the recognition in the world, but we're not actually helping these men to transform their lives, then what we're doing is in vain. And so for me and for our organization, it is those success stories like the one I just shared a few minutes ago.
So, what advice would you give young fathers who feel overwhelmed?
Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned that. So I mentioned that I was a father at 16. As it turns out, we accept fathers as young as 16, right? So 16 to 116. We may have some Abrahams out there. I don't know, but we accept fathers across the spectrum. For young fathers, and I'll be very candid here, we have difficulty attracting fathers. We'll call them 16 to 25 or so, because at the end of the day, I mean, I think part of it, frankly, is that literally, as you know, their brains aren't fully formed, so they don't know that they need us yet. The average age of the men who come to us is around 35. These are men who basically have said, I've tried my way for 10, 15, 20 years. My way isn't working so well, so let me try your way, right? So, if there is one thing that I would change, it would be our ability to attract young men in their teens and early 20s to really help them understand that the decisions that they make today are going to affect them down the road.
Wow. Now, I gotta say this. What we just covered here at this point. This is not just fatherhood. I gotta say that is legacy in motion. And so I think that the most important part about that is when you're talking about restoring families. And
Hmm.
so, as we talk about restoring families and we're talking about restoring futures, um, I want to shift to another pillar here, which is education.
Hmm.
So can you tell us, how did your journey as an educator begin?
So I've always had a strong interest in education myself. I'm a first generation college student, and I've just always had a thirst for knowledge, not only acquiring it for myself and not just for the sake of acquiring it, but how could I apply it in my life and in the lives of others. So I've had stints in academia. I've taught. Business 101 in intro to business. I've taught how to manage a nonprofit at the master's degree level. And so I've taught Sunday school for years. I teach Sunday school and Bible study, right? So for me, I just have this great love of knowledge. And so one of the things that I like to say is that because I'm an etymology geek, right? So the word education literally means to lead out. And so education is one important vehicle for leading us out of the situations that we have found ourselves in, many times through no fault of our own.
Mm. So, what's missing from traditional curricula when it comes to Black history and identity?
Yeah, that Black history is American history. Black history is world history, and so I mean, I hate to even call it Black history. It's just history, right? So at the end of the day, not only for Black students, but whites, Hispanics, Asians. They need to know our contributions not only to this society but to this world. I've been to the African American History Museum in D.C., which right now is still open. You never know about tomorrow. But I've been there 3 times and still have not made it through the entire list of exhibits because I want to stop and read every single exhibit that they have in that wonderful structure. And so, yeah, it's crucial to understand that this isn't just African American history. This is American history.
Mhm. Wow. Um, how do you incorporate cultural relevance into your teaching methods?
Well, so one way we do it is that we begin with what we call the circle, right? That goes back to whether you're talking about African roots or frankly, when you're talking about gang activity today, when men stand in that circle, right? So, and in many cases, when we're talking about the latter, the gang act, they don't even know where that comes from. That comes directly from our African roots, and so that circle is a time where men can be vulnerable, that they can share their any trauma that's gone on in their lives, and so that is a very poignant and powerful um, uh, item that we a vehicle that we use to educate our men and to form bonds.
So, with these guys being reentry, and I don't know, like if time really matters or how that works. But
Mhm.
with reentry, how do you guys determine like competency levels when you first start working with these individuals?
Yeah, so I should be clear that not all of them are returning citizens. About half the men we work with are returning citizens. We also, by the way, we go to the penal institutions, to about 4 penal institutions. We work with men who are fewer than 90 days from being released. We help them to reintegrate back into society, into the workforce, and into their families. But knowing that so many of them have that background, that's where we focus on, as I said earlier, self-esteem, right? None of us is the worst thing that we've ever done, right? And so, as I say to our team at Fathers and Family Center, our job is to love these men, not to judge them, right? So we all have things that we've done that we're not proud of, and in some cases, some of them they've committed some pretty serious crimes, but the fact that they've shown up, because you have to be there voluntarily. If you are sent there by, say, a parole officer, we're going to send them back to them, right? Because they're not going to get anything out of the program if it's not voluntary. So these are men who said, I need to make a change in my life, and that's half the battle right there.
Oh, wow. So, what's one lesson every Black student should learn from graduating?
When they graduate, they should learn that and it may sound a little bit cliche, but once they graduate from our program, it really is the start of the rest of their lives. That they can get a job, or what we would call a job or career with a family sustaining wage, right? So not just a job. We have this philosophy we call ABC: a job, a better job, a career, right? So to let them know that they can go out and be the provider, because that's the fourth P, the provider that they can be for themselves, but also for their families, right? No matter what they've done, they can overcome that obstacle.
So, how do you mentor young men to see education as liberation?
Yeah, I use myself as an example, frankly. So, I meet the men during the first week. We let them get, it's through 3 week program, Strong Fathers is. So let them get acclimated for 3 or 4 days. And then I come in and talk about, my story, right? Again, my parents were divorced when I was 3 or 4 years old. My father was not involved in my life. I grew up in the hood in Indianapolis. I'm a father at 16, but I became a first generation college student, right? And I went to one of these, so-called elite private schools, both as an undergraduate and then in business school. And so started my career in corporate America, spent 11 years, was very, very successful there, but walked away, had a crisis of conscience and walked away from all of that. And, high six-figure salaries, stock options, profit sharing, and when they invariably they'll ask, well, why in the world would you do that? Well, one is because God said so, but second, I was confident that I had the education that I could go and do whatever I wanted to do, and so I always emphasize it is crucially important to obtain as much education as possible.
So, with the mentorship, I mean, do you pick these guys that you mentor like firsthand, or do you just have a group that you mentor at one
No,
time?
anyone who shows up, right? We do not cherry pick. If you show up at our door, we're going to help you.
What challenges do Black boys face in the classroom that are often overlooked?
Oh my God. Yeah, the fact that so many people have a negative view of young Black men. They're a thug, they're this, they're that. They're not intelligent. They're more prone to violence. They're more prone to sexual violence, all of those things. And unbeknownst to many of these young men and boys, they're not even aware of how those negative stereotypes affect them. They're disproportionately placed in remedial classes. They're disproportionately labeled as troubled students, and on and on and on and on. And those are just societal challenges. Systemic racism is real. And even if you want to talk about subconscious or unconscious bias, even though increasingly that's becoming illegal even to talk about in our nation, sadly. But it is just because you don't want to talk about it, or just because you're trying to get rid of it via policy or even laws, doesn't make the challenge go away. So it really is incumbent upon us who know what's going on. As we used to say when I was growing up, each one teach one. And so I have 3 kids now. My oldest, who I mentioned, is 38 now. Is just celebrated 11 years of marriage with her husband, 5-year-old son, 4-year-old daughter who can do no wrong in my eyes. But when she was growing up, and now I also have a 20-year-old who's at Howard, and an 18-year-old who's at NYU. I inculcated with them those principles with them. So my oldest and my middle ones are daughters. My youngest one, my baby, although he would hate me saying that, is my son, and they grew up with those principles.
Hmm. So, if you had to reach out to, like, let's say what they call these underserving schools,
Hmm.
and you want to keep these kids from actually going into that prisoner pipeline situation,
Hmm.
what would you tell them, or what could you do to help them to prevent them from getting into that situation?
Yeah, that's a hard one, because it's so individualized. But at the end of the day, work your hardest to learn your hardest, because there are a lot of things that they can take from us, but our education is one that they cannot. And I want to be clear here. Education is certainly in a formal sense is important, where you go to school, but also that what we call being an autodidact, teaching oneself, right? So you have the lessons in the classroom, but go to museums, right? I tell my kids that there are these ancient buildings called libraries that have these artifacts called books, right? Go to the library. And it really is incumbent upon, parents to ensure that the education of our children, first of all, we should be their first teachers, but their education does not in the classroom. So putting them in an environment where they can learn as much as they possibly can, and nurturing that, encouraging that, right, is crucially important.
How do you train educators to be more responsive to Black students' needs?
Yeah, so I don't have a lot of contact with educators sort of individually, but I do try to do that through my column, right? So I write a weekly column for the Indianapolis Recorder, which is the third or fourth oldest Black newspaper still in existence in our country. So I write a weekly column. Been doing that for about a decade, and so I do emphasize in that, you need to see these young men, these young women as human beings who are worthy of respect, who are worthy of God's love, and who have all the potential. It was funny. I was talking to a couple, Black couple. They've started something called the Performing Arts Conservatory, and when their daughter, who's is grown now, but when she was in elementary school, she was talking with her mother about something. And she made this comment. Her daughter did. She said, "Oh, don't worry about it, mommy. I'm not a good math student." Or I'm not sufficient in math or something like that. And this is a little girl, and they thought, well, that's really an odd statement coming from our daughter. Who, so yeah, how would you even know? But well, it turns out her teacher had said that to her, right? You're just not a good math student. Well, fast forward, this young woman graduated from college with honors in math, right? But those messages that we receive from the external world can really pollute our minds. And so it's really, really incumbent upon parents to dispel all of those negative things that they're going to hear about themselves as Black people. So that parents have just a crucial role. So educators, yeah, that's important. But more important is getting to the parents to make sure that they understand the importance of their role as teachers.
So, what's your vision for community based education?
Community-based education, I think with the church, with nonprofits, with libraries, it does. I know, and everybody knows this and says this, but it's because it's true. It really does take a village, right? Go to the museum here in Indianapolis, and of course I'm biased, but we have the world's largest and best children's museum. It has an unbelievable exhibits, right? So I took my kids there. I take my grandchildren there, right? So that's just another, and that's, learning in a fun way, right? In this children's museum right now, they have this wonderful exhibit where they feature both fictional characters and real life characters, and so, for example, they have some of the actual costumes from Black Panther, right, in this exhibit, right? They have a lot of clothes or costumes from actual historical figures and so on. So crucially important to expose children to this rich history that we have, again, outside the classroom.
Now, tell me what is your take on, like they have the public schools and now they're going crazy now with these charter schools.
Mhm.
I mean, what would you say? What is your opinion if we basically went back to this old time of actually creating our own schools, educating our own children?
I think that's crucially important. I mean, you mentioned charter schools, and Indianapolis, along with Louisiana and some other places, really we're ground zero for charter schools. And I always tell folks, for me, I'm not pro charter, I'm not anti charter, right? I'm pro good schools, period. So public, private, parochial, charter, traditional public, if it is doing its job to educate children effectively, then I'm for that. I don't want to just dismiss a whole category of schools because there's some of the there are a couple of charters here, probably more than that, but at least two that I'm aware of that are Black run, right? And so that's fine. But at the same time, it takes a lot of money to open and run a school, and so sometimes people will launch schools and they have a grand vision, but they don't have the grand finances that go with it, right? And so I just always suggest to people, do your research, and send your daughter, your son to the school that makes most sense, that has a record of success. But that makes most sense to them, right? Some are more, even militaristic and rigid. Some are more for, kids who are free spirits. So know the personality of your child, know the learning style of your child, do your research, and then send them to the appropriate school.
So, how do you balance academic rigor and emotional intelligence?
Well, I think they go hand in hand, right? I mean, I know some brilliant people who can't really relate to other folk, and that's a cross race, right? That's not a racial thing at all. And so, social, we call it, social and emotional learning, SEL. Some folks in our country think that's some backdoor into critical race theory and all this. It's lunacy, absolute lunacy. Social and emotional learning helps children to become a well-rounded person, how to deal with their emotions, right? And so, I just social and emotional education is simply education, right? That's exactly what it is. Not only again for the classroom, but for life. And so, I think that is absolutely crucial. If you're not mentally and emotionally, and I would argue as a Christian, spiritually healthy, then I don't care how smart you are, you're probably not going to do well.
So, you mentioned, let me ask you this because you mentioned something that actually stuck in my mind here when you mentioned critical race theory.
Hmm.
Why do you think people have this issue about critical race theory where everybody's got this different interpretation and it seems like nobody has it right?
Well, there's a person who said, I love the poorly educated, right? And God knows they love him. So if you just throw out red meat to people and they have no idea, critical race theory is not taught in elementary school. It's not taught in middle school. It's not taught in high school. It's taught in a beginning sense in college, but it's really a graduate level, uh, y- you know, ideology. You can trace it back to, Derek Bell, for example, who the late great Harvard Law School professor, who lost his job basically because he advocated for more black women on the Harvard Law School faculty. But critical race theory, if you think that CRT is being taught in your middle school, as my late grandmother would say, you got another thing coming. It's lunacy, right? But if you can, fear is an incredible motivator. Fear and ignorance are a lethal combination. And so when you can just throw out these terms and have no idea, there's something called the Dunning-Kruger syndrome, which basically means I am pontificating about a topic about which I know nothing. And we see that over and over again in our society, tragically.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's pretty horrible because I think those people that are actually and trying to argue about that particular topic,
Hmm.
it's actually become detriment to a lot of
They
people.
don't know what they're talking about. They really don't.
Yeah. What's your take on the school to prison pipeline and how do we dismantle
Let me start with the second one, how to dismantle it. It's going to be very, very tough because our prisons, as you know, are increasingly privatized, right? They're a business. And if you are a business, you have to have customers, right? So there is a financial incentive to keep the school to prison pipeline going. And President Obama and President Biden tried to dismantle some of that. I mean, at the end of the day, we got to have prisons, right? I am not anti prison, right? But there's a reason that they used to be called reformatories. They were designed to reform, or penitentiaries. You do your penitence and then you're released. That's not what they are. They are places that house people who are making money for the prison industrial industry, the complex. For the first part, right, is just doing our best to keep our kids out of the system to begin with, right? And that, is in many cases a lot easier said than done. We know that we are hunted. In the words of the late great Tupac Shakur, we ain't meant to survive because it's a setup, right? So we have to be aware of that. and address it head on, right? So get your children in school, get them in church, get them in community-based programs to keep them as far away from that system as you possibly can.
Mm. Oh, so Rhea, from chalkboards to community boards.
Hmm.
Definitely, I like that. So let's go to this part of your writing where you write
Hmm.
your op-ed column. What led you to start writing op-eds?
Well, my mother actually was a writer. She actually used to write for the Indianapolis Recorder. She was on staff. She covered crime and politics, and so I've just always had a love of writing that I inherited from her. And so I was asked about a decade ago to write, a weekly column, and I said, "Well, what top?" The editor at the time, I said, "Well, what topics would you like me for me to write about?" She said, and this was the editor in chief at the time. She said, "Write about whatever you want to write about." I said, "Really?" Okay. So I started doing it. Now my columns tend to focus on the intersection of race and politics. It didn't start out that way, but in 2016, the election really kind of changed that, and then kind of in the aftermath of that. So I have very, very, very wide ranging interests: music, movies, and everything. But I tend to focus on that intersection between race and politics.
Can you tell us why?
I think it's crucial. Again, it goes back to education. It's another way to educate people. We have extreme media consolidation in this country, which is dangerous for our democracy. More and more information, control of information in the hands of fewer and fewer people, and we saw that even regarding the situation with Jimmy Kimmel and Nexstar and all these, and the president suing ABC and CBS and all that. Well, these are companies at the end of the day, and they're trying to get as big as they can possibly be, and so that means acquiring other stations or other companies. And so this concentration of the flow of information in the hands of the few is just exceedingly dangerous for them. And I say that whether you're liberal or conservative or in the middle, we should have as many diverse voices, not just racially, but politically, socially. Spiritually as we possibly can, because that's what democracy is. And when you have that concentration, it's a dangerous thing. So I'm so proud to write for a Black independent newspaper.
Now that's my next follow up, because my thing is what happened to black media is almost like we have like just totally dissipated. And
Well,
so
it's expensive, right?
yeah.
Yeah, it's expensive. I mean, to run a new, because it's advertising dollars, right? And print is not a dead medium, but it's and there we do have the electronic version as well. But it is hard, and then you're competing and competing against these larger and larger companies. I'm even if you look at some of the major papers, there are only a handful, maybe five, who can survive on subscription alone. New York Times, for example, they can survive on subscriptions alone. Now they don't want to do that; they still have advertising and all that, but you have to be a huge paper to survive that way. So there's that competition, and so it's hard. It's very, very hard.
So how do you choose the issues to write about?
You know, I don't mean to be flippant, but I think they choose me, right? So there's so much that happens in a week. So I'll give an example. A couple of weeks ago, I wrote about Charlie Kirk, right? He was someone with whom I was familiar, certainly not a fan of, but when he was murdered, that presented an opportunity, right? And as I said in my column, um, political violence should have no place in our society. Full stop, right? Charlie Kirk should be here, loving on his wife and kids, right? Full stop. That doesn't mean that I will mourn for him. I do not mourn for Charlie Kirk, right? He was poisonous. He and again, I am a Christian. In my view, Charlie Kirk was a Christian nationalist. He was not a Christian, and so it was an opportunity to talk about what he meant, and not just to slam him and all that. That wasn't the point of the column. In fact, one of the things I said in the column was we need to be less concerned about the words that were in his mouth and be more concerned about the things that are being done in his name, right? So if we talk about freedom of speech, right? And that's coming from people who are trying to abrogate, trying to limit, trying to cut off our freedom of speech in this country. But they keep talking about how he was a free speech advocate. So this blatant hypocrisy that we have is insane. But that happened, and so I had the opportunity to talk about that.
So, as a columnist, now
Hmm.
please help people to understand this for me.
Hmm.
What is the difference between an assassination and a murder?
I think that is largely a political question. You might recall that several years ago, after the deaths of Biggie and Pac, Chris Rock talked about, he said Martin Luther King was assassinated, Malcolm X was assassinated. He said Biggie and Tupac, them, Negroes. He didn't say Negroes. Them Negroes got shot, right? And so, that's Chris Rock and his humor. But I think that it's making the point, right, that it's about perspective, your political perspective, and of course now he's making a joke out of it, but I think it's really the point. For me, Charlie Kirk was murdered, right? For those who were his disciples, people who believed him, he was assassinated. At the end of the day, it doesn't make a difference. He's not here, so you can call it whatever you want to call it. But I think we assign the term assassinated to people who we love and respect. That's what I think it boils down to.
So, what's the most impactful piece you've published and why?
Wow, I'm not being falsely humble here. I really don't know how to answer that question. I will hear from people sometimes who get very angry with what I write. Some people who really really like what I write. So for me, I couldn't tell you which individual column it would be, but for me, it's most impactful when it starts or continues a conversation about how we can make change for good in our nation and our world.
How do you use your platform to speak truth to power?
Yeah, I always like to say I start with the power of the truth, right? And so at the end of the day, nothing is going to be more powerful than the truth. In the words of Maya Angelou, you might write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies, but still like the dust, I'll rise. So at the end of the day, we have to be willing to talk with two people in power with the truth. So yeah, we can talk about speaking truth to power, but to do that, we have to believe in the power of the truth.
Mm. So, what advice do you have for aspiring Black writers and journalists?
Read. Read. If you read, you will become a better writer. If you do not read, you will not become a better writer. I am a voracious reader. I love reading. I love education. And, Chat GPT can be a great, or whatever AI you want to use, can be a great and wonderful tool. But one of my fears is that it's going to take away people's ability to write and to write effectively. Eventually, it will kind of cave in on itself. It will collapse on itself, because there has to be a beginning point. There has to be a reference point to say, well, I want to write like Michael Eric Dyson, for example. So take this concept and write it. Create something that Michael Eric Dyson would have written. Well, okay, but at some point, what if Michael Eric Dyson, were never born, God forbid, big fan of his. But there has to be a beginning point. And if we don't learn those basics, which we do, I believe, through reading, but then also by continuing to write. Writing is an iterative process, which is to say, the more you do it, the better you will come. But if you don't read and you don't practice your craft, you're not going to be very effective at it. Unless that's just a gift that God gives you, would never count that out. But for most of us, we got to grind.
So, how do you respond to critics who challenge your perspectives?
I love that. Right. I mean, I want to be challenged. I mean, I mean that absolutely sincerely, because I don't. That's how you grow. At the end of the day, it doesn't even necessarily mean that we will agree. Right. Now, I'm gonna walk away with my same opinion. You walk away with yours. But I have grown because I've seen another perspective. Right. And so, I really, really, in fact, I prefer to be challenged as opposed to be congratulated all the time. I want to be challenged because that's how people grow. And my boo does that all the time. If she's listening, she loves to challenge me. I'm like, baby, chill out. But that's how you grow, right? If you're challenged,
Yeah. What's the role of media in shaping public perception of Black families?
it has its role is too large in my view. And when you say media, I mean I'm going to include social media in that. It's something like I read a statistic that something like 50% people get 50% of their news today from social media, which is just scary to me. I mean, even when it is accurate, you only get this snippet, right, of a story, and it's the TikTokification of the world, and I think that's dangerous because not only do you spread a lot of ignorance. I was just reading a story today out of the UK where a woman whose daughter had cancer, but she didn't believe in chemotherapy treatment, and that young woman is dead now, right? Sadly, this is not young woman, girl, she's dead because her mom, had been influenced by, it's just bizarre to be that you think that your cousin and some dude you don't know on Facebook knows more than doctors do, whether it's COVID or whatever. It is just bizarre to me. And so media, in particular, social media, um, just perpetuates that. I think there's a danger there that we need to recognize.
How do you balance vulnerability and strategy in your writing?
That's a good one. Wow. I'd have to think about that. I mean, I try to. I think it begins with transparency, right? I just try to be transparent, and vulnerability. I think is incredibly important. That's one thing that we talk a lot about, at Fathers and Families Center. This notion again. What does it mean to be a man today? Well, if you think that I can't emote, I can't cry in public, and especially not in front of my children, and so on, that is we're trying to correct those kinds of ideas. So there's nothing wrong. It doesn't make you less of a man because you show emotions other than anger, right? So I think that's crucial, and so I try to reflect that in my writing.
What's your process for turning lived experiences into public commentary?
Yeah, that's another thing. That's another part of being vulnerable, right? I mean, so this is, I'll give you an example. I wrote a column, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago, and I don't even remember what the exact topic was, but it was basically, angry black man. And I said, damn right, I'm an angry black man, and this is why I'm angry, right? And so, you take that for what it is. I have reasons to be angry, and by the way, the person who sits in the White House is angry every day. Y'all don't seem to have a problem with that, right? I mean, so yeah, just be true to yourself. Be true to yourself.
How do you ensure your writing reaches the communities who need it most?
So the Indianapolis Recorder is a part of a network of I think about 200 black newspapers across the country, and we share stories with each other. It's funny. A friend of mine was in St. Louis a couple of months ago. He sent me a screenshot of my column in a black newspaper in St. Louis. I had no idea that it had appeared there. And here's the kicker: was it said our guest columnist. I had no idea that this column was even in their paper. So I had kind of a good laugh. And some of my friends got really mad. I was like, "Are they paying you for that?" But we're in this consortium of black newspapers where they share stories. So that's one way. Another time, I got an email from a friend who said, "Your column is in the New York Times." I'm like, "Wait, what?" And so I opened up. Sure enough, my column had appeared in the New York Times. And so once it's out there, the internet is the internet. Right, so it is what it is, and so to the extent that it reaches a lot of people, it's an honor for me.
Oh, wow. Well, as you say, words do matter. And
Hmm.
when wielded with purpose, they become tools for justice.
Hmm.
When I talked with you, I was asking you about Black history, and I asked
Hmm.
you who were the most influential people in your life, your career, and you
Hmm.
told me W.E.B. Du Bois, Martin Luther
Hmm.
King Jr., and Frederick Douglass.
Hmm.
Can you tell us why are W.E.B. Du Bois, Dr. King, and Frederick Douglass are so central to your life's work?
Yeah, well, let's start with the oldest one. So, yeah, Frederick Douglass. People don't know that. I mean, this man wrote three biographies. His life was so rich, so full. Not only was he an abolitionist, he was a champion of women's rights. Right, in a time when black folk didn't have rights. Right, he wanted women to be able to vote and all that. So, I just look at his life. The fact that he made himself coming out of slavery. Baltimore's finest. Right, he made himself into an icon who is still influencing us today. W.E.B. Du Bois, right, first black man to earn a PhD from Harvard, a brilliant scholar. They call him, the father of black sociology. Nothing wrong with that, but really, he's the father of sociology. Period. Right. So sometimes when black people say stuff, it's out of a sense of pride, but sometimes it's the other way. It's like, well, it's a limiting thing. Well, he's the father of black sociology. No, Du Bois was a literal genius, right? And then I had the pleasure, the honor of going to his home in Ghana. Some people know that at the end of his life, near the end of his life, he had a self-imposed exile in Ghana because he was just tired of dealing with racism in this country. He dies on the eve of the '63 March on Washington and so on. So just a giant, just a giant. And then, of course, Dr. King, in my opinion, the greatest person that this country has ever produced. In fact, I wrote a column when I was talking about Charlie Kirk. On social media, I made a preface, and I said, in my opinion, Dr. King is the greatest person this country's ever produced. And it doesn't matter to me if I'm the only person who admires him. I mean, these people were so offended that people got mad at Charlie Kirk for what he said. In fact, the title of that column was Charlie Kirk, nuance and context. Well, you're taking what he says out of context. No, I'm not. He said what he said. And I said that I have enough respect for Charlie Kirk to believe him when he said what he said. And so for Dr. King, it's like he just had such an outsized influence, was not a millionaire, never ran a company, was not a military leader, was not a politician, and yet he transformed not only this country but the world. And so, how can you not respect and admire that? Even with his flaws, because people, and I hate to keep because it just really ticked me off when I saw this. They kept wanting to compare, Mr. Kirk to Dr. King. It's like, no, not even. I mean, not the same. They both believe in Jesus, right? That was really about it. That's about all they had in common, as far as I'm concerned. And then even in the column, I said, I'm not, and I mean this with all due respect. Sometimes I really do wonder: do black folk and white folks even believe in the same Jesus, right? Because of what I call Christian nationalist, what they espouse and what they preach has no resemblance to the Evangelion, the gospel of Jesus Christ, as far as I'm concerned. So when and so my point is there. Just because and we all have flaws, just because a person has flaws doesn't mean that we hide them, right? Michael Eric Dyson years ago said that saints are tough role models, right? So if you're perfect, it's hard to be a role model, right? And so he had his flaws, but for me, that doesn't diminish his greatness.
What lessons from Du Bois' double consciousness resonate with you today?
Oh man, what he talks about in Souls of Black Folk, where this double conscious in one, these two warring factions in one dark body whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder, right? So when we talk about this notion of being an American and a Negro, that still exists today, this double consciousness. And I just that never gets old, right? It's 122 years old, but it never gets old. Reading that, Souls of Black Folk or Black Reconstruction, and on and on and on. And so this man was such a visionary. He was so far ahead of his time. His frustration, his disappointment, his anger, his righteousness, his righteous indignation about what was going on in this country and in this world is just an inspiration to me. And so for me, I look at our ancestors and I go, yeah, we're going through some craziness, some insanity right now, but if they could survive what they did in their time, then it is our duty, our responsibility to keep striving in our time.
How does King's vision of beloved community inform your advocacy?
Well, I look, man wrote 5 books. The last one was going from chaos to community, whether we were going to have chaos or community. And right now it seems like chaos is winning. But He was always again a visionary. He talked about when people say, well, in X number of years, in 10 years, in 20 years, in 100 years, things will be better. And he talked about he called that the myth of time. There's nothing inherent in time that will make us progressive, right? It's only what we do in the time that we live that will make change either good or bad. And so when we talk about the beloved community, right now it seems that we're further and further away from that. But as I've written, at the end of the day, in my opinion, it is until white Americans have to decide that they're not willing to harm themselves to keep us down, because that's really what it boils down to, right? It is pathological. Not every white person. I'm specifically referring to our Christian nationalist friends and our racist friends. It's more important to them. I mean, when you say I'm willing to hurt myself if it keeps, and even if it's not conscious, even if it's subconscious, I'm willing to hurt myself to keep something from black folk. That is a pathology, and so we have to just as the senior saints used to say, just keep on keeping on.
I'll tell you that's another show because when you what you just mentioned before,
Mhm.
I'm actually trying to find a way of actually having that talk on the
Mhm.
open because I know that for some people, there's for some people that's kind of like a truth that
Yeah,
they really do not want to hear.
right,
Because the
right.
truth is the truth, don't care how you look at it. And I say everybody have their own truth, but the truth is what we know it is to be.
Yep,
And
yep,
so what's inevitable is inevitable.
yep.
Um, what aspects of Douglas's journey as a self-taught man inspire your educational work?
Well, let me just So with him again, if you can imagine teaching yourself to read, and yeah, he had a little bit of help and all that, but in effect, he taught himself to read, right? And which is almost inconceivable to me. But that's why I said when we look to our ancestors, look to those who came before us, the obstacles that they had to overcome are just unbelievable, right? So there's no excuse, and this is what I tell folks. There's no excuse today, right? We have everything in the world open to the internet, right, is open to us. And again, there's some very negative aspects of that, but there's something called Khan Academy, KHAN, right? Khan Academy. It is a free resource. It'll teach you everything from your ABCs to calculus to foreign languages. Sal Khan is the founder of that. It's a free education for the world. And you go at your own pace, right? That's what I'm saying. It's outside the classroom, right? So the Khan Academy, KHAN, get on that and learn literally almost any topic from nuclear physics to foreign languages to whatever. I do say I have to say I've got another commitment now at 7 o'clock. So if it's okay, I do need to run. But really appreciate this opportunity and would love to come back anytime.
Okay. Alrighty. Uh, Thank you. I appreciate your time, and we'll catch up with you another time.
All right, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you all for watching the show tonight. I want you all to have a great evening.